Salve Skipoli. All right, we are going to take a look at the grammar of lesson 36, and I'm going to introduce it to you in a series of sentences that I will talk through, and it'll be up to you to take notes on this grammar as I describe it. We're going to start with this sentence, Calerius curo. Okay, curo is simply the verb meaning I run. Then we see this form Calerius right here. Okay, note the IUS at the end of it. You might remember that IUS showed up as a comparative adjective form in the neuter. Okay, so one possible way to translate Calerius, if you see it in a different context, is more swift. Okay, because that's a neuter comparative. But another possibility when you see an IUS is that you are looking at a comparative adverb. Okay, so you could translate this, I run more swiftly. Okay, so one might be wondering, how do you know that this is a comparative adverb as opposed to a comparative adjective? Well, it will only make sense in this particular instance as a comparative adverb. Okay, so the bottom line here, the lesson to be learned, the take-home message is IUS, can be a comparative adverb ending. I run more swiftly. All right, let's try number 2. All right, very similar sentence, obviously. Pugnawisti is your main verb. Okay, then you have this fortius form. Notice the IUS. So again, this could be a comparative adverb. All right, the fort part, we probably realize, comes from the adjective meaning strong or brave. So, pugnawisti, we go isti it. So this is you have fought more bravely. So this is a comparative adverb here. You have fought more bravely. So take home message, once again, IUS can be more adverbly, however you want to say it. All right, now we're looking at a sentence that goes pessime nauagamis. Nauagamis is our main verb. And then we've got this pessime. We know that this SIM business signals a superlative. But note this time, and there should be a long mark over this E, not that it's a big deal. Note this time we have a superlative, but we have an E ending. Okay, and you can probably figure out, if you think about it, if you think about this long E, you can probably figure out that this is how you make a superlative adverb. Okay, so this was a comparative adverb with ius. A superlative adverb, we just have the long E at the end. So this would be translated, we sail very badly. Okay, pessimist coming from malus, right? It's the superlative of malus. We sail very badly. How about this last one? Ambulawit, your main verb. Then tardissime, notice the isim. This is another superlative. Notice the long E. There we go. Notice the long E. So this is a superlative adverb. He walked very slowly. All right? Okay, now we get a more exciting concept. When you have a situation like this, where you have a superlative, notice fortissim, right? Issim, this is a superlative. If you have a superlative and you have the word quam, there's going to be a very special translation. A superlative plus quam equals as blank as possible. So what does fortis mean? It means strong or brave. This is an adverb, fortissime, so we're going to translate this as blankly as possible, as strongly as possible. So pugno, I fight as strongly as possible. Okay? Quam plus a superlative, translate it as blank as possible. Let's look at another one. Okay? This one has 2 different verbs. And we all know if we have 2 different verbs, we must have 2, that's right, class, clauses. Okay? It's going to basically be divided like this. Start with Wenita, which is a command. Come to the camp. Then we have quam, and notice, please notice, we have another superlative with the rim, right? Isthmus, rimus, limus. These all signal superlatives. And notice we have a quam with a superlative. So we know this is going to be as blank as possible, except in this particular instance, they have a verb potes. Okay, I'll bet you guys can figure this out. Come to the camp as swiftly. Instead of saying as possible, we're going to say as swiftly as potes, as swiftly as you are able. Okay, so it's similar to this, as bravely as possible, but this time instead of as possible, we have potes, you are able. So come to camp as swiftly as you are able. All right, we only have a few more sentences. This time, we have our verb faciemus. We have our accusative iter. We have quam and primum. Now primum is a superlative. It's an irregular superlative, but it's a superlative all the same. It means first, which is the earliest you can go, right? So this quam plus a superlative is as blank as possible. So we're going to translate this as first as possible. That's weird. We will make a journey as first as possible. What do you guys think that means? It's going to mean as soon as possible. We will make a journey as soon as possible. All right, now I'm going to show you some words you need to know. We talked about how ius makes an adjective into a comparative adverb, how isime or rime or whatever the case may be makes a superlative adverb. Now we're going to look at two words that have unusual comparative and superlative adverb forms. The word diu, right there, diu, means for a long time. So diutius means for a longer time. Diutissime means for the longest time. Then we have the word sypa, which means often. Sypius would mean more often. And sypissime would mean, logically, most often. Very good, class. All right, number 8. Now we see the word sypius that I just talked about. There's some other interesting business going on that I'll talk about in a second. Our main verb here is winket. Our nominative is going to be Caesar. And then actually Barbary is going to be nominative as well. And then we have an ablative in multo that's going to be an important part of this sentence. And we have the word quam, and we may remember that when we have a comparative, which we have right here with ius, when we have a comparative, quam should mean than. And that is exactly what's going to happen here. So, I'm going to translate this sentence without multo in there. And then I'll bet you guys can figure out what to do with multo on your own. Caesar conquers more often than the barbarians. In other words, Caesar wins more often than the barbarians. Okay, makes sense? Now, the question is what to do with multo. Okay, this comes from the word multus aum. I'll bet you guys can guess your way through this. Technically, this is what's called an ablative of degree of difference, but I'll bet you can figure it out without even knowing that. Caesar conquers much more often than the barbarians. If you want to be really literal, Caesar conquers more often by much than the barbarians. So Caesar wins much more often than the barbarians win. All right, let's see another example of this ablative of degree of difference. The ablative of degree of difference can also show up with the word post. Okay, so here's Paolo, here's your ablative of degree of difference. And then our nominative is Barbary. And our main verb is fugerat. So, post simply means afterwards, okay? Or maybe later, okay? So, the barbarians fled later. That's your basic sentence. If we include this ablative degree of difference, okay, which means little, by the way, Paulus means little, this sentence would then mean the barbarians fled afterwards by a little. In other words, the barbarians fled a little later. All right? This is kind of a tricky concept. We'll revisit this tomorrow, but I wanted to expose you to it today. All right, let's try one more. This time, instead of post, we have ante. Okay, and ante is accompanied by this ablative in multis and this ablative in oris. Then we're going to have nuntius in the nominative. And we're going to have nawigawit as our main verb. So, the messenger sailed to the province. There's your basic sentence. The messenger sailed to the province. Ante means earlier. Post meant later or afterwards. Ante means earlier or before. Okay? And then here's your ablative degree of difference. So the messenger sailed to the province before. Okay? Before by many hours. In other words, the messenger sailed to the province many hours earlier. Okay? And what this ablative degree of difference is ultimately telling you is after you say the messenger sailed earlier, it's telling you to what degree earlier. How much earlier? And the answer is many hours earlier. Or here it's telling you how much later. A little later. That's the degree of difference. Here it's telling you Caesar wins much more often. How much more often? Much more often. Okay, that's your ablative of degree of difference. All right, there's some tricky stuff down here, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. What I want you to definitely have at least a little handle on coming into class tomorrow is the idea that ius can be a comparative adverb, more blankly. Issime or rime or lime can be a superlative adverb, so very blankly. Quam plus a superlative equals as blank as possible. And really, that's what I really want you to have a handle on. Okay, we'll work more with this ablative degree of difference tomorrow. All right, waleta, Discipuli.